Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Across the Fence. I'm Jolie Whitney. Earlier this week, we recorded a program with the co-chairs of the Vermont Agricultural Recovery Task Force. Our program was preempted by WCAX News to bring you up-to-date coverage of the current flooding. We're going to air that program today in its entirety, but first we want to let you know if you're a farmer experiencing flooding or damage from water or any type of weather-related activity, please email agrfloodresponse@vermont.gov or call the number on your screen. When I spoke with Roy Beckford of UVM Extension and Nicole Dubuque of the Vermont Agency of Agriculture to discuss the flooding in 2023, we began by talking about their experiences from that day and how Dubuque narrowly made it out of Montpelier before the interstate was closed.
My family was with me in Burlington, traveling up from Florida, and we couldn't go anywhere. My kids thought, what's going on? Is this Florida? I mean, where it rains a lot in summer. But yeah, that's basically what I was doing, entertaining my family and doing work when I could.
Absolutely, and you must have had to kind of pivot focus pretty quickly there.
Absolutely, had to do that. It was raining quite a lot.
And how about you, Nicole?
Yeah, I was actually at our office building in Montpelier that day, and when I got the alert that we needed to leave the city, I got on the interstate and headed home. I actually live in Grand Isle County, which was not as hard hit, but I remember looking in my rearview mirror when I got on the interstate and seeing it flood behind me, and I actually had to pull over halfway home and call VTrans and let them know. So yeah, I made it out of Montpelier just before the interstate closed.
Wow, so you definitely saw the flooding firsthand there.
Yes, for sure.
All right, Roy, when we had both of you on last February, there was really large gaps in damage funding needed and the federal funding provided. Have those gaps closed at all?
Yes, to quite a degree the gaps have closed. I think that most of the agencies, private organizations have kind of come together and assisted farmers as best as they can. In some cases very organized, in some cases kind of more loosely, but generally speaking those gaps have closed and farmers have rebounded to quite a degree.
And this report stated that over 50% of farmers said that they were going to be in the red this year. And Nicole, how is that looking so far?
Yeah, so unfortunately, obviously, people who are in the red when their business isn't doing well, they don't really want to talk about that. So I can't say that we have exact data, but anecdotally, we know that there are a lot that did end up in the red, and thankfully, many of them were able to sustain their business because of, what Roy was just talking about, private donations and state-funded efforts helped some, but we don't have an exact number.
And another thing that became pretty clear in this report is that a lot of Vermont farmers didn't have flood insurance, but it's not quite as simple. It sounds like, or crop insurance, I should say, but it sounds like a lot of that insurance doesn't cover the diversified crops that farmers have. Can you kind of expand on where that disconnect is and what the status is now?
Yeah, so that's a good point, and I have heard since our last time on the show, people confused about that. So specifically, we're talking about crop and livestock insurance. So crop insurance, the policies that are available really are not designed to help small diversified farms. It's very administratively burdensome, and the premiums can be very high for the coverage that you get. So that's one issue. That's not to say that farmers don't have personal insurance, which is something that I think people were confused by. So many folks still have homeowners insurance. They still have insurance to cover their other farm assets. And we're going to talk later about a survey that we're going to put out to really get at the level of insurance that's out there, because I think that's a primary focus of the Agriculture Recovery Task Force right now, is how do we support our farmers in Vermont to secure their assets.
So if they already have home insurance, can you tell me specifically what crop insurance covers?
Yeah, so it literally covers the loss of crops due to natural disasters. So if your primary crop for the year is berries and you lose, like last year when we talked about the freeze, and you lose those, then you could potentially get a payout from crop insurance to support replanting efforts and cleanup efforts. It doesn't always cover the loss though, and I think something to bring up again that we talked about before is that it covers the crop itself. It doesn't cover the value-added product. So let's talk about wine, right? So if you get the cost of grapes recovered, but you couldn't make wine that year, then you're still in a deficit.
Sure, so sometimes it's the product that you're making with it.
Correct.
All right, and we're talking about the funding gap, but that doesn't include any privately raised money or donations. So is that federal money still coming in? Is federal assistance still ongoing?
So there is federal assistance still available through USDA. There's a multitude of programs that exist. I'm not sure exactly how much funding is left, but there are programs available.
And Roy, we talked about one of the findings of the Vermont Agricultural Recovery Task Force was the need for resilience for future events. And of course, we've already had some pretty heavy rain this year, and some communities have already seen some more water. So can you tell me about the resilience and kind of is this about financial? Is it environmental? What are we talking there?
Well, agronomically speaking, many farmers have rebounded. If you walk into one of these farms that was affected significantly last year after the flood, you'd see productivity and production going on. So agronomically speaking, they're pretty much rebounded. Environmentally, I mean, where are we with that? I mean, we have to keep defining and coming up with sustainable solutions to address environmental changes due to climate change and other impacts. Financially speaking, is exactly what Nicole talked about earlier. We're kind of trying to kind of figure that out because it's a little bit fuzzier, and sometimes farmers do not necessarily tell you exactly what's going on.
And when we're talking about resilience, are we talking about it just from a financial perspective, or are we also looking at best management practices?
Holistically, we're talking about everything. Resilience, at least in my book, is defined as the ability to bounce back. Agronomically, as I said, I've seen a rebound. Environmentally, we're going to have to continue to actually take the best practices that we've actually figured out and applied to the future and to the current. But financially, once again, that's tough. It's tough to kind of say whether there's resiliency there because farmers are not necessarily flush with money.
And Nicole, you were saying a little bit before that the numbers we're not quite as privy to when it comes to the federally available financial aid, but how much can that money be stretched going forward from your knowledge?
I think that we need to continue to explore better policy. There are programs that I know we're looking to improve in the Farm Bill, and when I say I'm talking about like our congressional delegation is looking to improve through the Farm Bill and through other proposals that are going to go through Congress, and I think we need to continue to explore that.
And if there's a farmer that's still maybe in need of federal funding or even looking for state or donation help, how can they find out where to get funding?
Yeah, I would really encourage them to look to their local FSA office.
All right.
Yes.
And how much of the findings from the task force is about when disaster strikes as opposed to kind of promoting policies that'll make it so it's not as bad if it happens?
Yeah, so to speak to the report that the task force put out in January, I'm going to say, and Roy, jump in if you've got other things to say, but I would say like 70-30 split there in that 70% we need to really talk about resiliency measures and preparation, and then the other 30% is like how do we react when disaster strikes is how it's broken out.
And the other thing is that we actually made recommendations along three major topics: farmer empowerment, I think government relations and so on, and then the other part is regulatory recovery. And so the way we defined it, we wanted to make sure that our advice was broad, but it honed in on the specific needs coming out of the disaster last year. So we're looking at the issues that impact farmers directly, how government can step in and save the day, so to speak, and then all the regulatory issues around farms and their activities that constrain them.
And it sounds like, Nicole, there is going to be some follow-up with the farmers in this survey, is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So we need to collect more data, and we're going to do that through this survey and continued meeting with the task force as well. And then we're going to kind of go from there and see what we need to propose for next session.
Sure. Can you tell me a little bit about the survey, maybe how somebody could take it or what kind of questions will be asked?
Sure. It'll be posted on our website, so folks can go there until the end of August. I think we have an August 31st end date for it, and they'll be able to click and take it there. It's a very simple multiple choice survey with a few options to be able to add kind of your own text in there, but really we're talking about insurance. We want to see what people have for coverage now versus what they had before the flooding. We also want to look at if people were able to get their damage covered. So we ask questions like, was your insurance policy covering you? If you didn't have insurance, were you able to get federal disaster aid? If not, were you able to get assistance from other people so that we can close that gap? One of the things that we have heard anecdotally that we're trying to get at in this survey is that because farmers both do business and live at the same address many times, they've struggled to get assistance from FEMA to cover their home because they also do business there, and they've also struggled to get assistance for their business because they live at the same address. So I know it sounds like a rock and a hard place there, but we're trying to find out how many people have been impacted by that.
All right, absolutely, and that's available on your website. We'll actually have a link at the end of the
Yes.
show, so if somebody's interested, they can take it there.
Perfect.
And before we wrap up, Roy, do you think, based on all of the work that's been done by your task force and all of the research you guys have done, are we better off if disaster strikes again?
I think we're in a better place, at least to deal with another disaster. One thing I want to remind everybody is that livestock farmers are crop farmers too. They grow forage for the animals, and they lost a lot of that, just like people who lost vegetables and all things of that nature. That's very important to remember. But I think what the task force has done is to kind of help us understand and to build a framework for best practices in response to emergencies moving forward.
All right, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to read the Vermont Agricultural Recovery Task Force's report or to find out about resources available through the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, visit the website on your screen. That wraps up another Across the Fence. My thanks to the crew behind the scenes here at WCAX for making our program possible. I'm Jolie Whitney. Have a good one.